Hi, and welcome back. One of the modules that caught my attention during the last Superbooth was Sofia from Chaos Devices, a large oscillator that uses a rather unique way to create complex waveforms. Over the last months, I've been able to explore it and see what it's all about. If you like to support my videos or you want to get access to the PDF sheets of the illustrations I use in this and many of my other videos, have a look at my Patreon. But now, let's dive right in. Sofia contains a core oscillator and two so-called ripple elements. I'll explain the functions and features of the front panel in a second, but those will make a lot more sense if you understand what these ripple elements are. The core oscillator in Sofia produces a sine-shaped bass tone. Each cycle of this bass tone spawns two unique ripple elements. These are either sine or square wave elements with their own controls, and they could look something like these two examples. They are re-triggered at every cycle of the core wave, so when added on top of the bass tone, the ripple elements help shape a single cycle waveform. Thus, the ripple elements are always in sync with the frequency of the core oscillator. Each of these ripple elements has a set of controls. On this screen, I will visualize just one ripple element with different settings. First off, you can set the ratio or density of the ripple, from about the same frequency as the core to about 8 octaves above the core oscillation. Most useful sounds are found with subtle settings and ratios in between. Then you can set the damp, or how fast the influence of the ripple element on the core fades out. This can be hardly noticeable with just a subtle damp, or so fast it takes just a fraction of the core cycle. Finally, you can use a warp control to have the density or speed of the ripple element go up over time within a cycle, or slow down over time within a cycle. These ripple elements can add a huge amount of variation to the waveforms, and they have extensive modulation options. The front panel of Sofia should make more sense now you understand how the ripple elements work. Here, in the center section, you can find control for the core oscillator with no complexity at all. There's an octave switch covering 8 octaves, and a central pitch knob, offering 1 octave up and 1 octave down from center position. And of course, there's a 1 volt per octave input. The clean sinusoidal waveform the core produces has its own unique output. This one is not influenced by the ripple elements. And there's a main output for the entire module here, with the effect of the ripple elements. When you just use the core oscillator, this produces a very warm, slightly saturated sine wave. Expanding to the sides, you find two mix controls. This sets a balance between ripple element A and ripple element B. And this control sets the balance between the core oscillator and the mix of ripple elements. Both of these have a CV input. Then each side has the same controls for each of the ripples I explained a minute ago. There's a little switch to select sine or square wave for the ripple. There's a ratio control for the density or speed of the ripple element, complete with CV input and attenuator. There's a warp control knob here, also with CV input. And a damp control, which is this slider, again with CV input. Finally, you can set whether the damp and/or ratio are relative to the length of the fundamental cycle or not, but in either case they stay re-triggered with each cycle of the core. To complete the front panel, each ripple element has its own output. This is without the decay or damp settings. And both have an impulse out, which is just the decay curve of the element. These outputs can be used for fun audio experiments, but are very much designed for self-modulation of the module. Lastly, there are two FM inputs. Pitch FM mostly preserves the shape of the resulting waveform, and global FM mainly affects the bass tone, resulting in more dramatic waveform changes when modulated. In this chapter, I'll keep the patches fairly simple, without other expensive modules or effects. This way, you can listen to some of the raw sounds this oscillator can produce. A good way to get a feeling for some of the bass tones of Sofia is patching a simple drone. Here, the core oscillator has a steady pitch, but both elements receive some modulation to the ratio from an LFO. The frequency of one of the LFOs is modulated with a third LFO for added movement. This brings out some nice overtones. Adjusting the modulation amount, damp, and warp sculpts the sound further. Let's add some ripping modulation to this patch. In this setup, a clock is triggering an envelope. That signal is mixed with a smooth random voltage and modulating the warp of element A, as well as element B. Depending on the settings, modulating the warp, ratio or damp can bring out resonant filter-like sounds. Here's a simple setup to show how Sofia can take care of both sound shaping and filter duties. The main output is sent directly to a VCA. A sequencer is used to create a melody and trigger an envelope. The plucky envelope opens the VCA. A multiplication of the envelope is sent through an attenuator and on to modulate the warp of element A. Output A is self-patched to modulate the ratio of element B, and an LFO is used to modulate the warp of B. Opening the attenuator to warp A creates resonant filter-like effects, while element B is creating a higher-pitched chiptune-like sound. Adding the self-modulation later in the demo adds a noisy, dry texture. Let's alter that patch a bit by adding a second envelope to the ratio of A. This second very short envelope can be used to bring out a very wet filter-like behavior, while element B is set up to add a more dry, modulated distortion to the sound. Here's the exact same patch again, but with a slow sequencer with some slew, and this time both envelopes are set to have slow attack and decay times. Tuning settings and modulation amounts is crucial with Sofia. By mixing different elements in and out and adjusting modulation, you can push the sound to all sorts of directions. You can keep tuning this patch in little ways and achieve different things. Here, the sequence is sped up again, and the oscillator is set to a higher octave. Also, the self-modulation is replaced with another LFO. Remember, there is still no filter or gate used in these patches. But let's try something different. Of course, you can easily get traditional and controlled sounds when using a filter to tame Sofia. Here, a bandpass filter is used. There's also a sequencer and an envelope opening the filter. Now, modulation and movement can be added to shape the undertones of the sonic character. In this patch, both elements are set to square waves, and each of the warp inputs is modulated with a different attenuated LFO. Let's add a bit of FM to this patch by sending an untuned oscillator to the global FM. The module responds very nice to both subtle as well as pretty extreme FM modulation, which can have a really heavy impact on the wave shape. this chapter, I'll add more depth to modulation and introduce a couple of other modules and effects. This shows how I would use the module in some music. I love rhythmic drones, so let's start with Sofia producing a single tone. A clock and clock divider are used to create tempo synced modulation. To bring dynamics to element A division is triggering a rising envelope. This is attenuated and modulating the damp. A free running LFO is attenuated and modulating the warp. And another division of the clock is used to trigger a short plucky envelope opening a VCA. The output of element B is sent to the input of that VCA, so short bursts of modulation pass on to the ratio of A. So to be clear, all modulation is just for element A. For element B, a sequencer is used, creating a 4-step pattern. This is clocked with the same slow division that is used on the plucky envelope. To shape the sound further, the main output of Sofia is sent to a low-pass gate, and that is used as the main output. A copy of the clock is triggering an envelope opening that gate, and finally, a multiplication of the main output is sent to Timisoara, used as a fully wet stereo reverb. The pre-delay on that is modulated with a very slow division of the clock. To give you some more sonic variation without too much explaining, here's basically the exact same patch. But this time the clock is also driving a sequencer. The tuning is turned an octave up and the LFO is moved to the other side, modulating the warp of element B. In this patch, Sofia is responsible for a bass line and some percussive plucks. The bass line is simple. A sequencer is used for the melody and triggering an envelope opening a low-pass gate. For some movement, an attenuated LFO is modulating the warp of element A. The mix is set fully to the left, so only the core and element A are audible during the bass line. For the percussive plucks, element B is used. The LFO modulating A is inverted and sent to modulate the warp of B as well. The output of A is self-patched to modulate the ratio of B. A trigger sequencer is used to select a few steps that swing the mix to element B. It triggers an envelope and that envelope is multiplied to modulate both the mix between element A and B as well as the mix between the fundamental and the elements, effectively going from A plus fundamental to element B only. This drops the bass and creates a little rubbery pluck. To create more audible distinction, a copy of the main output is sent to a VCA and then into a stereo reverb. A copy of the gate plucking the percussion is sent to open that VCA. So only percussive plucks are going into the reverb and not the bass line. worth it to explore the FM inputs as well. In this setup, a sequencer is tuning both Sofia as well as a second simple sine wave oscillator. That signal is sent through VCA and on to modulate the pitch FM. A slow LFO is modulating the FM amount, dragging the sequence in and out of tune. Element A is self-modulating its ratio, and warp B is modulated with an attenuated LFO. The main output is sent through a gate, modulated with a simple envelope. Finally, a copy of the output signal is sent through a wet stereo delay, which I'll mix in halfway in the demo. Here's the exact same patch, but tuned and slowed down. This time though, the global FM is modulated, and a smooth random voltage modulating warp A is added. Using the outputs of the elements for self-modulation adds a lot of tonal character variation, but of course you can also use them for experiments and stereo sounds. Here, the two main outputs of A and B are sent to bandpass filters and panned hard left and right to create a stereo field. An LFO and sample on hold are modulating the ratio of the elements, and the sequencer is used to create a melody and trigger an envelope opening both filters. And I had to do this one. Here's the same patch, only this time the outputs of Sofia are sent through the Chaos Devices Oscillator, a stereo frequency shifter, before going to the filters. The frequency and density of Oscillator are modulated with LFOs. I personally like to bring out the dark and gritty side of things, but I feel there are more sounds to discover with this oscillator, so I'm happy to add it to my setup. If you'd like to learn more about modular effects or that frequency shifter, have a look at any of these videos. Also, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.